Good morning. Morning. My name is Patrick McGinnis. I'm the director of EurekAlert. Just wanted to get the show started here today. I wanted to say thank you to everyone who has come here today to be here this morning. We really appreciate you being here. We had a lot of interest when we announced that we were going to do this program today. I think we have more attendees here than we've had at any of our past events that we've done here at the Press Club. So we're hoping it's going to be a really good program, and hope you find it informative and interesting. So while I'm up here, a couple things I wanted to mention. One, in addition to the panel discussion we had today, the director of the Office of Public Programs at AAAS, Ginger Pinholster, has set up her whole recording studio over here in the corner. So if you get a chance after the program today, please stop over there and check out what she's got set up. In addition, I just wanted to mention that if you have multimedia already, or you take what you learned today and start producing multimedia, EurekAlert has just launched a service where we feature multimedia, and you're able to submit multimedia, audio and video, with your press releases or without press releases, and we'll feature them on feature them on the website. So once you start producing it, we're ready to post it on EurekAlert. So I would like to introduce John Sang, who is with Spectrum Science Communications. He'd like to say a few words to get the show started. Thanks.
Morning, everyone. Wanted to first off say thank you to our friends Rockmond Culver and Patrick McGinnis for working with us highly effectively for another, I think, fifth program out of the past 5 or 6 years. And so we're, Spectrum Science Communications, my firm, is just delighted to be a co-sponsor once again. Both of our organizations are firm believers in the value of communicating high-quality science, and so it's exciting for us to invite such a prestigious panel this morning. For those who don't know our firm, just a little word from one of your co-sponsors. I founded the firm in 1996 as a health science communications, public relations firm. We're national and global in scale. We're the largest office of our kind in the nation's capital, and so we're also happy to welcome as guest attendees two of our clients here this morning, Kennedy Krieger Institute and the Society for Women's Health Research. So I plug in my clients, just doing my job. Particularly excited about this year's event because with the economic doldrums as the background, and I sort of say that with a little bit of, it's a softness that probably isn't warranted. That combined as a backdrop with the challenges. I mean, each of our budgets isn't exactly necessarily growing by leaps and bounds as we look at 2009. But yet, at the same time, with the evolution of technology, there are the challenges in mastering the technology, and also challenges in needing to do more with less. So I got my exercise this morning. Ginger got me taped already, and I don't know if I'll be broadcasting EurekAlert by the end of the day or maybe by the end of the hour. So I do support. Ginger won't bite your head off. It's just an interview, and give you sort of a quick run through on how it all works from a digital standpoint. So we're excited about the panel this morning. They're here to help answer all these questions. And we've got leaders in the media and one of the nation's top universities here to give us their perspectives and how they get it done. To really spark lively discussion, debate, and basically just keep us all in line, that's why we have our good friend and moderator, Rhea Blakey, here once again to host our program, to moderate our program. She is host of Discovery Health, CME, and a veteran journalist. Anyone who's lived and worked in the Washington area over the past number of years certainly knows Rhea, knows her image and her likeness, and she's very likable, of course. And so we're glad to have Rhea back. She's an Emmy Award-winning journalist who's covered national health stories for CNN, as well as a local anchor and reporter here in Washington. She also regularly shares her expertise with our firm, Spectrum. And so please join me in welcoming my friend and our moderator, Rhea Blakey.
Good morning, all. I am actually thrilled to be here. This may be actually my third, fourth, fifth turn here as the moderator. And I'm appreciative you're allowing me to come back because on occasion there has been a little bit of whip cracking when it comes to time. And that's because in your best interest, I want to make sure that our speakers not only give you the important nuggets that you need, but also that you have plenty of opportunity to ask the questions that you came here to get answered. So I am working hard on your behalf. I just want you to know. Just really quickly, what the agenda is for this morning. We do have, I will call him a phenomenal communications researcher, Karl Bates, who's here from Duke University, who has a special presentation he's going to share with us. But let me go ahead and do very quick introductions of the other speakers on the panel so that you know who will be addressing you today. And before I go any further, my apologies to the people off to my right. I know it's difficult to see the table, but we know you're there, and we will not neglect you. Okay, notice I turned specifically in your direction, okay? Just so that you know, these are all veteran journalists. These people have stepped away from work for a moment to make sure that you know what it is that they need so that you can get your job done. So this is actually a cooperative effort, which it has been every year, and I'm fascinated that we're addressing audio and visual in this particular time because as a person who does television, that's what my life has been since college. It has not been digital. It has not, there's been no YouTube all that time. There certainly hasn't been the availability for PIO officers to get information to me in the very quick way that you can with our panelists. So I expect it's really going to be a very engaging and interesting conversation. Some of the people that you will hear from this morning, our speakers on the panel in particular, Karl I'm going to save till last. He's immediately to my left. But right next to him is Nils Bruzelius. I do it every time, Nils. I apologize. I have to work through it. It's like the governor of Illinois, right? You just got to kind of keep at it until you get all the syllables out, you know. Nils has been a journalist for about 40 years now, the last 6 with the Washington Post. He spent a good 28 years at the Boston Globe and has also worked on the science desk at NPR. So he's got a wide range of experience he can draw from. Next to him, to his left, Tom Kennedy, who manages the Washington Post's web-delivered multimedia products. They have an award-winning team. Obviously, they haven't been in existence for an extremely long time, certainly not a 40-year track record, but they've figured out how to do it well. So we're interested in hearing from him as well. To his left is Chimes, who is the producer and host of Our World, which is a weekly radio show on science on Voice of America. Art has a good 25-plus years at VOA. He edits the web content there as well, and I thought this was interesting. He bought his first computer in 1983, and it had 2K of memory. How far we've come, right? And last but not least, we have from Discovery News, Jorge Ribas, who is at the end of our panel, who's a video producer who edits reports for Discovery News, which is the online news division at Discovery Communications. He covers a wide range of scientific issues and research. And so we will hear from the other 4 panelists after we hear first and foremost from Karl. I do want to once again remind you that the studio is set up. So after we hear from our panelists and have your Q&A, there is the studio opportunity for those of you who are camera ready this morning. I'm sure Ginger would greatly appreciate your participation there. And without further ado, let me introduce our first presenter, who is Karl Bates. Karl actually is the Director of Research Communications from Duke News and Communication, and he has a special video demo presentation for us this morning, and it sort of stands as, if you will, the stalwart for where we're all headed. He's probably the techiest guy on the panel, if you will. And so without further ado, please welcome Karl Bates.
Bear with me a second. We'll get the machine to do what we want it to do. Okay. Here we go. And forgive me, I'm on the tail end of a cold. Good morning. I'll start with that. Good morning. In retrospect, as frustrating as it was, 10 or 15 years ago, we had it pretty easy. Our job was when Professor Strangebeard published in Nature, we would write the 1,500-word press release with copious amounts of detail and long quotes, no art, start working the phone, email it, fax it, what have you, and hope that the print media picked it up, which was as you know, a crapshoot. But in hindsight, that was the good thing. Now we're in a situation where media goes every which way. Media is the people. The traditional media, my colleagues from the Post, are fighting against layoffs and buyouts, and it's the case where I am in the Research Triangle in North Carolina that there are no science writers left. So the old model of writing the release and pitching it and helping that reporter bring a photographer in to take a picture and working with their graphic artist to develop their own graphic for it is gone. You're going to have to do more of this work yourself. The good news is you are now a publisher. You can actually put these things out yourself, and you have to start thinking about things other than big .com sites. You have to think about people using your material on Facebook and on their personal blogs, sites like Live Science picking it up whole and just pasting it on their page with your byline on it. All of these things are in play now. So how are you going to do this? I get a kick out of this. I don't know if you can read this text, but this is a firm out of the Bay Area in San Francisco that has what they call a social media press release template. And you can see it's got RSS, it's got Dig and Delicious and Reddit and all this other stuff. And my favorite parts are core news facts, bullet points, boilerplate statements, that's always good, and pre-approved quotes from corporate executives. Nowhere here does it say, write a crackerjack lead, put an awesome headline on it. They're kind of making a mistake. This is the extreme in the other direction, what I call 32 flavors of content. We have to have video, we have to have a dig feed, we have to have a delicious page, we have to set up Facebook. That's a bit much, but you do kind of need to start looking in that direction because the media is all around you. So the bottom line is that long and gray press release that worked for you 10 years ago is no longer enough. It just doesn't cut it, particularly if you've written a big, sonorous, boring lead on it like you used to write for reporters, okay? Really good headline, really good lead, because more and more your readers are going to be looking at this thing on a 3-inch screen while they're crossing the street. And the people who pick your stories up are picking up your headline and lead. They're not writing their own. Write and produce for your audience, your direct consumption. You're a publisher now. You have to compete with all the .com guys. You have to write stuff that will stand on its own. The good news is we've got the content. We've got great stories. I did one 2 weeks ago about this 1-inch single cell that blobs along on the bottom of the ocean. I mean, how cool is that? The bloggers love that stuff. Chunk your stories. It's a term I invented, but instead of that one long, carefully constructed story, whether it's reverse pyramid or whatever, it's got Corinthian columns and everything else in it. Chunk it. If there's an interesting person in there, you do a sidebar. If you've got some salient points to make a bullet box out of it. Put your stuff in little digestible pieces. And then finally, of course, multimedia, which is a 2-day session in itself. Think about whether there's video potential for this. Does the researcher have their own video? We'll talk about that in a minute. And more your folks are already doing video. You just have to pick it up. Do your own photos. Audio. Do they have data? Is there something you can graph? Can you do a slideshow with the research images that they've captured? I mean, like everybody, like our business is getting more visual, so are the scientists. More and more they're doing supplemental videos and supplemental photos that they put on the web when they publish their print paper. Social media stuff, we'll talk about that in a minute as well. I personally love the most emailed feature on sites. It's just an instant snapshot of what people thought was cool. And a comment box. We have the ability now, we would have killed for this when I was in newspapers. Your audience can actually talk back to you. They can ask questions. They can tell you you're an idiot. They can tell the other guy who posted he's an idiot. Again, people like that. It's this thing they call Web 2.0. It's a conversation now. It's not a lecture. So this changes your output. You have to think about adding these elements to your release, and that means you're thinking of it more as a package, not as a story. And packaging helps pick up. Even traditional media like the Washington Post, they need the photos and the videos because they don't have as many people to do that stuff. If you do some of that work up front, it enhances your chance of pickup. Offer embed code on your pages when you do this. Embed code is web lingo for a little string of HTML that somebody can literally cut and paste and put into their blog or news site or whatever, and your video plays right into their page. Your web people can help you do this. YouTube, if you go to the little menu thing when you're looking at a YouTube video, there's a chunk of embed code there, and you can paste that anywhere you want, and that YouTube video will play. Offer one-click referrals, the email this button, the put this on your Facebook page button. Make it as simple as possible for people to clone your stuff. Web 2.0 is all about things being copied and copied and copied. It's there's an awful lot of hand-wringing in our business about, what are we going to do about social media? We should have a Facebook page. I think that's missing the point. What social media means is word of mouth is the media now. You've all done it. You see something cool in the New York Times, you mail it to 3 of your friends. That's where we need to get our stories, frankly. And it's tougher. It's not as easy as the good old days when we knew who the paper was. Now you don't know who your distributor's going to be, but somewhere out there are people who will be sending your story, and it's sort of like a nuclear reaction. 2 begets 4, begets 8, begets 16, and next thing you know, you're viral. You hope. All right. Part 2, DIY video. Do it yourself. Look, how hard can it be, right? YouTube grows by hundreds of thousands of videos every day. The videos are being made by 8-year-olds. You guys are mostly professional journalists, I would hope. Some of you are scientists who fell into this, but either way, you've all got the smarts to work this stuff. These 2 cameras on the right and left are under $150. They have no moving parts. They shoot really good video, although it's handheld, so don't drink too much coffee. The mic's built in. They're really good in low light. And you pop that thing out. See the guy's hand? That's a USB. It goes right into your laptop, and you've got video. I'll show you how this was used in the field in a little bit. Or, of course, you can skin your knees a few times learning how to use the big thing with all the buttons. The bottom line here is that you can do web video for a couple of $1,000 of initial investment and just a little bit of seat of your pants learning. Taking a class is great, but I'm a big advocate of just getting out there and doing it and not overthinking it. The equipment is so smart now that this has become very democratized. And again, you can see it all over YouTube. Everybody's making video from their phones, from their webcams, from these $150 things, and from the full-on $15,000 rigs. It's all available to you. And the software, basically you need a camera, software, and a laptop, and you're in business. So 3 real quick tips to get you started. These are my 3 favorite approaches. I have no idea who the guy is. I just found him on Google Images. I searched talking heads, and I came up with this guy. A lot of folks now are doing talking head science videos. The Sci-V TV site basically puts somebody in front of a bookshelf, and they talk for 10 minutes. And, man, that is deadly TV. Ray will tell you. That's But it turns out that the guy sitting in front of the bookshelf has a bunch of really gorgeous research images. You can, with this editing software, very easily, while he's talking, while his whole sound bed is going along, show a little slideshow of his video. Just jazz it up a little bit, make it a little more visually interesting to hang on to your viewers. Second, lots of your folks are producing short little research videos off their microscopes or time-lapse photography or high-speed photography or whatever. They've got these videos. You have to ask for them. They don't always put them on their website. But at the time they tell you, hey, we got a paper accepted, ask, got any video? They will. And then what we do at Duke is we take those. They're usually too long, the quality's not great, whatever. We do a little bit of the visual editing, and we stitch together what we think makes a pretty good visual narrative. And then we send a reporter over with one of those $100 MP3 sound recorders. They play it on the person's computer, and she narrates the film. And you do it 3 or 4 times until you get enough sound. You got an instant video. You don't even need a video camera to do that. Keep it short. We aim for 90 seconds at Duke. That's our nosebleed territory. I sometimes go to 2 minutes, but I get scolded for it. If you think people are ruthless with the TV remote in their hand, watch somebody with a mouse in their hand. You've got, or if you look at your tracking statistics on your site, 70% of the people that hit your site are there for 2 seconds, right? Off they go. So keep it short and be exciting. Don't be boring. All right, a little bit of show and tell. This is an example of, this is the editing software that I use. It's Adobe Premiere. runs on my awful Windows machine. The high-end thing is an Apple product called Final Cut Pro, and it is to video editing what the full-on Photoshop is to photo editing. It's got all the bells and whistles and all the switches. If you have somebody on your staff who wants to learn it, that's great. It's a very powerful thing. And the nice thing about Final Cut Pro is it can produce TV-quality stuff. Premiere would be a stretch. So here's an example of where the videographer in our we had a laser. The videographer in our medical center did this nice talking head interview with this guy sitting in his lab. It's typical. He's sitting on a bench. There's speakers behind him. It's 40 minutes of tape. And it's just this guy sitting there. So I'm looking for a 90-second story. Well, it turns out the guy's talking about stem cells, which are beautiful. They've got all these confocal microscope images, which so what you're looking at here, I'm sorry, that bottom thing that looks like a fever chart is the audio track. That's the sound. You can actually see his words. You can clip out the ums and ahs. The next track up is our talking head thing. And then above that is where I laid in still images so that while he's talking, you have these gorgeous slideshow images coming. This is a relatively quick and dirty way to make a talking head into something better than that. Second example, this is a gentleman named Richard Fair in the engineering school who does microfluidics. He makes little drops of fluid dance around on a silicon chip. This guy had like 20 of these little movies on his website. They're really cool. But they didn't have any sound, and they didn't have any explainer to say what they were. So we grabbed, half a dozen of them off his site, the ones we thought were the coolest, and literally sent the reporter over with the audio recording. After I'd stitched them together in some kind of narrative form, he just went through and narrated what we were looking at. Unfortunately, you'll notice that the fever chart part doesn't really seem to have any data in it. The guy didn't record it loud enough. So I'm not going to show you this video because it didn't turn out all that great. But this is an example of the video was already there. We just had to add audio to it, and we were done. And it's a really nice product. Okay, a little show and tell. How am I doing for time?
You're doing okay.
All right. In the summer, one of our graduate students, Meredith Barrett, went to Madagascar, the little island off of Africa, which is super primitive, but they do have some internet connectivity. She's working with mouse lemurs, these adorable, the smallest member of the lemur family. So we hooked her up with a $150 flip cam. She's in the field. She's eating beans and rice 3 meals a day, sleeping in a tent with really bad internet connectivity. But look what she could do.
All right. In addition to the genetic data that we're taking, we're also looking at coloration and size to try and figure out what species are at Crendy-Matei. So we're looking at the ear size, the coloration of the above the brows to the crown of the head, the white patch between the eyes, the color of the belly, and the color of the body, as well as the potential stripe, reddish-brown stripe that goes along the back. And looking at the color of the tail.
So, if she can do that, you have no excuse. Her connectivity was about the equivalent of a dial-up, and she was able to post this stuff to Blogspot, the free Google blogging site. It's lemurhealth, one word, .blogspot.com. She did a bang-up job. It was really cool. Oops, I didn't go back to my slide. Sorry. Now I've really broken it. Shoot, you guys, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Well, no, it's not okay. Carl Bates, here he is. Okay, next example. I got it. I just hit the wrong switch. Virtual biopsy. Here's an example of a guy who had a really great research video taken from this new scanning thing. And I went over with the voice recorder, and he narrated it. I'm not going to show you this whole thing.
This is Duke University.
And we'll talk about this in a second, too.
What you're seeing here is an actual three-dimensional optical coherence tomography unit that is taking an image of the retina of a patient who has blurred vision. The reason.
So this one's a good one. The video itself, it came out to 50 seconds. What he sent us was, I don't know, 15 gigs or something, and it was only like 4 seconds long. It's typical of these science things. They've got, a zillion frames a second. So we dumbed it down. We made it go backwards and forwards. We zoomed in on it, and then I took it over to him with this audio recorder, my laptop. I showed him what we had on my laptop, and he talked. We went for 20 minutes. The guy, you heard the jargon. The guy just couldn't quite do the soundbite, and I, as I was doing it, I pieced together, okay, I've got a little bit of a soundbite there. I can take that piece, and I can take that piece, and I can take that piece. And then at the end, I said, just for kicks, Michael, let's do this one more time. Turn the thing on, run the video. 54-second video, right? The guy, without any ums or ahs, lays out this beautiful 52-second narrative. Golden. I didn't even listen to the other 15 minutes. I went back to the office, I lifted the 52 seconds, I put it on, I was done. Sometimes you get lucky. What we're looking at here is an archive. We do all of our video on Flash, which enables you to embed it in pages. Throughout Duke, we embed it in multiple pages. A given video will be in multiple pages. It allows you to give people embed code. And most importantly, for my money, is it plays without a player. You don't have to get the white screen and the blue queue and wait for the thing to go. Flash just plays. It's native to all the browsers now. If not, it's a free download. We love Flash. You can see also, well, here's Git code, here's Git link. You can find this on iTunes where we have a library. You could share it with your friends, Dig, Delicious, Facebook, etc. Again, that one click, hey, here's a cool video, boom, tell your friends. Okay. What we all hope for in all this, I mean, I will tell you, a good video for us is 100,000 hits or something, which is not shaking the world yet. What we all hope for is the viral video, right? The thing that gets 10 million hits. So one of my favorites in this genre is some graduate students at Princeton who got their hands on a Diebold voting machine and hacked it. They figured out a way to get a virus into the thing to totally skew the election results. And the video that they made is really a lesson in how not to do web video. It's 9.5 minutes long. It's visually boring. The guy's voice is kind of, well, then we did this. And
this is a Diebold AccuVote TS.
This thing went everywhere
machine
because of the
type
concept.
used in elections in several U.S. states.
See,
How
you're already
the
falling
votes
asleep.
are tallied. His malicious software can steal votes, and it can cover its tracks so that the theft cannot be detected.
Right, 9.5 minutes of that. This thing got hundreds of thousands of hits, and it got cloned several times. What happens on YouTube, if somebody really likes it, they copy it and post it again. And these guys ended up being on Fox News. So sometimes it isn't all about your production values. It's about the content, and people really wanted to hear this story and see this story, so it took off. And these guys didn't work through their news office. Graduate students did it on their own. They posted it on YouTube. Kabam, million hits. All right. Then there's just the flat-out silly shrimp on a treadmill. Are you guys familiar with this story? Okay, it's a couple folks out in Oregon, University of the Pacific. They're studying global change and how it affects decapods, crustaceans, and they had this great idea to put a shrimp on a treadmill. They did that, and then they put the shrimp on a treadmill on their websites, research video. They just put it on their website. Some guy found it and set it to music. And the rest is history. There are 62 different versions of this video online. And that having happened, it becoming a YouTube phenomenon, they ended up on the Today Show. See, it all works backwards in Web 2.0. It's the word of mouth that gets you into the traditional media. I'll just give you a little flavor of this. You can choose your songs. There's the Chariots of Fire theme. There's Rocky. This one, the Benny Hill one, I think is the best fit. But literally, 62 of them. Come on, YouTube. I could hum the Benny Hill thing for you. Stop it. Start it again. Start at the beginning. Well, little guys are running like hell. All 100 legs are going, yeah. Well, that's too bad. Yeah, we can go to bed. See? Just can't rely on those internets. There he is. just goofy. But so the guys get on the Today Show because this became a cultural phenomenon, and they actually got 5 minutes to talk about their science. It was cool. You just never know anymore. It's getting really hard. Okay, and then there's this one. This is a beauty. This is, I hope you've seen it. 4 million people have. This is a young woman who's a science writing intern at CERN, and she's a Michigan State University graduate. You can ask my friend Jeff Cook about denying her an internship. She's now very famous. She explained high-energy physics in a rap song, and it's good, and people love it.
Oh, yeah.
A little Stephen Hawking voice going here.
I'm adopted drugs of particle physics and particle physics and the LHC is super to the LHC is super to what I'm saying.
Protons being round through the ring, they ride, feeling the hawks and Jordan stitches, kilometers wide, and all that energy time with my becomes around.
So this is the chorus, and she repeats it like 4 times, and it explains Large Hadron better than anything I've read. It's really good. She describes what all the different instruments do, and she's got all this scientific illustration that they produced. She just stitched it together to make a video, and she chose a rap as her narrative, and that made it go viral. But this is great stuff. And so on. And that one's 5 minutes long. Just put a Large Hadron rap into YouTube and you're there. Okay. That's me. That's what I've done. Thanks. I look forward to the Q&A.
Wow. A, I have got to watch more YouTube. B, there's so much going on that, you know, the old way is the new way is the old way all over again. Isn't this exciting? Don't you find this fascinating that you have this kind of access and yet the challenges that are presented as well? Let's give Karl another round of applause. That was phenomenal. I love that. Whew, okay. My head's spinning, all this technology and information. It's just, I love this stuff. This is cool. All right, our next speaker is Nils from the Washington Post. He's the deputy national science editor, and he's been there for a number of years. And because of time constraints, I'm not going to do introductions all over again. I'm just going to ask Nils to come forward and share with us all his valid and genuine information that he wants to share today so that we can eventually get to Q&A. Please welcome Nils.
So, greetings from the dead tree, end of journalism. There are a few of us left, although, as you know, it's fewer and fewer all the time, and so you are consequently outnumbering us by greater and greater margins all the time. I'm going to let my colleague Tom Kennedy talk much more about sort of the details of how we're using new media, but I want to just give you a little bit of the context of how it's affecting our decisions on the national desk and in our health section and in the ACE section as we decide what stories to do. But I should warn you that some of what I say could easily be out of date in 6 months or a year because things are changing incredibly fast. The Post, in particular, has a new publisher and a new editor just within the last 6 to 9 months. And we're going through a number of changes. They just announced at a meeting this week that our strategy going forward for the paper and for it's no longer the Washington Post newspaper company, it's Washington Post Media. But our strategy as we try to figure out how to survive, they want to keep the newspaper alive. As we know, all newspapers are in tough shape. But our strategy is to be going to become more and more Washington-centric. What that means is still to be worked out in detail, but clearly it means that using the advantage of where we physically sit to cover things that no one else can do in the same level of detail and with the same granularity and with the same immediacy and impact. But the other thing that's in the wings is that right now, as you may or may not know, the Post sits downtown here 2 blocks from the White House, and WPNI, the website, is across the river in Rosslyn, and that's going to change sometime in the next 6 months to a year. I'm not sure exactly the time frame. We're actually going to physically merge and end up in the same place downtown. And the newsrooms will, to some degree, also get merged. And Tom and I were just chatting about this, and it's not clear whether, who will sit in the same room or whether we'll just be in the same building. But it's clearly got to make a difference, and the goal is to make a difference in how we interact and how we make day-to-day decisions about using new media. How that will actually affect sort of news choice decisions is yet to be worked out, but clearly when it's a much more interactive process, when I'm perhaps sitting next to someone who is really expert, which I'm not, at making the most of the kinds of things Karl was just showing you, it will undoubtedly have an impact on our thinking and hopefully lead us all to be more creative and to be more successful in delivering quality journalism. But for the moment, let me just tell you where things stand. I mean, obviously, there are fewer and fewer of us, as I said a moment ago. In the 6 years I've been at the Post, my staff has shrunk from 9 people to 6 people. In the buyout that took place last summer, the health section, and by the way, the health section is run independently. Francis Sellers is its editor. We sort of work shoulder to shoulder, but and collaborate closely, and my staff contributes to the health section, which is very much focused, as you probably know, on news to use. But it is a separate staff. But she lost her entire staff, with the exception of a news aide. So it went from having 2 editors and 3 or 4 reporters and a news aide. It went to being an editor and a news aide. As you can imagine, that poses a challenge. She's always relied on a fair amount of freelance, and that's not going to change in this context. But now, of necessity, my staff was providing her with a lot more content than we used to, whereas we used to be focused almost entirely on writing for the A section. Each one of my reporters now has an obligation to provide at least 1 piece, sometimes 2 pieces a month for the health section, and that has had an effect too on our coverage choices and coverage decisions. So, getting back to what Karl was saying, let me point out one thing, and that as fantastic as this stuff is, and we're certainly looking for opportunities to use that kind of material, it very rarely, if ever, actually drives our choices of what stories we're going to do. We're still looking at looking for the really interesting pitches, the stories that are broadly based, that are really about something that's going to change the way the world works. Stories that raise really troublesome or provocative questions. As you, I'm sure, all know, we do far fewer sort of one-study-based stories than we used to. We really give them a cold, hard look and say, well, does this point to something bigger? But let me give you an example of a pitch that I thought was particularly effective that I got a couple of days ago, and unfortunately I thought of it only last night when it was too late to dig into my files back at the office and find this pitch, so I'm a little fuzzy on the details. But it involves a researcher who has been pushing a different way of evaluating a fairly common condition. I think it was a heart problem, and basically had been a voice in the wilderness for 20 years. And then suddenly, as a result of some very recent new research, suddenly what he's been pushing is catching on and changing the way this small aspect of medical practice is done, but it has a deep impact on the number of people who are directly affected. And, of course, heart disease is a hugely common thing. Now, this was just a paper pitch. It was an email to me. And I go through most of my emails pretty damn fast, given that when I sit down in the morning, I've got 70 or 80 waiting for me that weren't there at 8 p.m. the night before. But this one caught my eye right away because the way it was framed, the notion that this was actually going to change medical practice, that it was something that it also had this interesting backstory about how this had been pushed for a long time, but not caught on, and then suddenly things had changed. And this was, I immediately emailed back and said, this is really interesting. I'm going to talk to one of my reporters. It's not something, obviously, we're going to try to write for tomorrow's paper, because if we do it, and that's not a given at this point, but it's something that, I'm certainly reacted to with much more interest than a lot of other things I see. If we do it, there's a story that I think could become either a terrific feature for the health section or possibly an A1 story. So to me, the content, the impact that the story could have is still the driver. So then how does the new media opportunities play into my decision making? Well, once we've decided that a story is worthwhile, then we're saying, okay, what can we do with this story on the website that will really enhance its impact there? We know that there's a limited amount, it's going to have relatively minimal impact on what's in print in the paper the next day, but we know that it makes a big difference to us now. The more we can, maximize the impact of that story through the website, the better it will be for us. And so we're instantly looking, are there animations? I mean, the kinds of medical imaging down to the molecular level that's going on these days is just fantastic. And sometimes a story that would be, perhaps almost too basic science for us to really want to grapple with can come alive as a result of some of this. Although I will, it was interesting what Karl was saying about how he develops a narrative. We've looked at a number of pieces of very interesting video, particularly microscopy stuff, that we didn't end up using because we didn't have a narrative to go with it. We needed somebody to be able to talk through it, and we lack the capacity to we don't have the resources to do that ourselves very effectively. But if we'd gotten that same piece of video with a good narrative, spoken over it that could explain what people were saying, we would have snapped it up like that. So that I think that's a very powerful piece of advice. And interestingly, actually, it seems to me that we're very often now finding out about what's available, not so much through the PIOs that we deal with, but actually from the researchers. Once we do the interview, we're emailing them, what have you got? And I suspect that a lot of places could do a better job of telling us right away, by the way, if you're interested in the story, we do have these other things you could make use of. Getting back to pitching us a little bit, as you know, we're overwhelmed. And I do have, I guess, one pet peeve that I would like to bring up. And if your email doesn't bounce back, please don't call me to ask me if you've got it. If I got it, I mean. I do, and I realize not every reporter, not every editor probably does this, but I do try to look at every damn thing that pops up on my screen that's not spam. And if we're interested, we will, take note and we'll get back. I really think it's a waste of your time and mine to call me, did you get my email? So I'm hoping to moderate that problem just by standing here and saying that. And now I also want to give a piece of advice I've given at sessions like this over the years is if you want to be maximally effective in reaching us, you've really got to know us. And that means, you need to have looked online, if not, in the print product, at what we're doing and particularly what reporters are doing what. Pictures, I think, work much best when work much better if they are done with some insight as to the kinds of things the paper as a whole is doing and the kinds of things individual reporters are doing, to just sort of blast us in random hopes that, there'll be the fish will get caught on a hook is just not very effective. If you care about particularly placing it with us, that is. I mean, pay attention to what we're doing and what we're not doing. Another thing is that I've gotten increasingly skeptical about the exclusives game. I mean, obviously we're interested in scoops, but they want to be substantive, and we run into a lot of people who say, well, we'll give this to you alone, when what they're really trying to do is take a story that they know darn well is only kind of so-so and hope that by offering it as an exclusive that will bite. Sometimes we do. And as I say, we're definitely interested in stuff that's a real scoop, where it really puts us ahead on something of importance. But I'm increasingly skeptical and looks just kind of suspiciously at these offers of quasi-exclusives that really don't amount to a great deal. So as I said, what really pays off is knowing what we're about and what we're focused on. And I also want to remind people that I think it's always more effective actually to sell a reporter than an editor. Reporters are individualists. They like to be, they like to think of themselves, and they are self-driven to a great extent. I don't do a lot of going up to reporters and saying, hey, I want you to do this story. I do a lot of talking to reporters and saying, okay, of all the things that, going on right now, what do you think is most interesting? What are your latest ideas? Here are a couple of things I noticed that were kind of cool. It's a very much of a collaborative process, and the things that they're most enthusiastic about are the things that they pitch to me and convince me that we should do, as opposed to things that I convince them to do. I want also say one brief thing about dealing with bad news. And I have a concrete example of this from my Boston days, and this goes back quite a ways, I acknowledge. But there are really effective ways to deal even with pretty darn bad news. And this example has to do with the fairly early days of the AIDS epidemic, when people were beginning to wonder what would happen when a hospital employee was diagnosed with AIDS, and how would that get handled, and how would patients be dealt with, and how would staff be dealt with. Well, sure enough, of course, it happened before long, and we got a tip that an employee wasn't an MD. I think it was a medical assistant sort of person, had been diagnosed with AIDS at one of Boston's very prestigious hospitals. And they had a very, very, he's long retired now, but a very, very good PIO. And we called up and said, look, we had this tip. And he could have sort of, stonewalled us. And I know other PIOs in Boston at the time who would have done just that. But he said, all right, figuring somebody was going to call sooner or later, here's what I'm prepared to do. And he said, if we can agree on certain things, like you will not ever, not use, even if you find out the name of this individual, we'll sit down and we'll put our people who are dealing with this, and let you talk directly to them. Let them explain how we're dealing with our patients, or how we're going to deal with our patients, how we're dealing with the staff, and we'll let you write the story. Well, it was, in the end, they got a very positive story about something that could have been extremely negative. And I just put that out there as something to think about. When you think you've got something really troublesome, you may be able to turn that around for you by being more open than your first instinct would be to be. So back finally, just to perhaps lead into Tom a little bit, when we're looking at which stories to do, and when I'm making those decisions with reporters about which ones we're going to look at, we are now every day thinking about, okay, what is there that we could offer the website? And we're in touch with, we have producers that we work with that are specifically on our stories, and if we see that, if we find out that there's great video or animations or just links to actual papers, although that's kind of, that's really boring these days. But the more of that kind of thing that we find out is available, the more quickly we are in touch with the website and saying, hey, we've got some really cool stuff to go with this story. We want to obviously enhance the play we get for our stories on the website. Everybody's always complaining that, hey, my story wasn't on the home page. Having these things available gives us more impact with our own website, and of course the reporters love that and gives us the potential to reach many more people. And I think I'll leave the rest for the quick Q&A.
As Tom comes forward, might be interesting to think about sort of the cross-pollination, if you will, that we're actually witnessing here, because as Nils suggests, he comes from the pen and paper journalism school, and Tom, who is in charge of all the online news that happens at the Washington Post, has really crossed that cultural digital divide. And so it's a transition that's really kind of fascinating, and yet as PIOs, you really do have to work in both worlds, so to speak, moving forward, obviously, in a futuristic sense. But it is an interesting conundrum. So please, without further ado, welcome Tom Kennedy.
Thank you. I'm going to be fairly brief because I'd like to reserve the bulk of my time for the question and answer, because I think I can be more valuable to you probably in that context. Let me just say that my background is I came from National Geographic to the Washington Post 10 years ago with the goal of helping them develop a multimedia team. And so I approach basically our work from the context of trying to look at the possibility of not only responding to things in the moment and trying to put the best possible visual journalistic face on whatever is unfolding in the moment, but also to try to develop a richer, more complete contextual package for some of the key stories that we're dealing with. And obviously working with Nils and his team and dealing with the health section of the Post, we see great opportunity to utilize multimedia as a mechanism to tell those kinds of stories. So for me, being here, I'm interested in health and science, both from the perspective of dealing with that process of science actually happening and the benefits that accrue from science happening, looking at that aspect of things as a potential for stories, and I'll explain why in a second, as well as sort of obviously looking at stories where people have received the fruits of benefits of health and science discoveries. what we look for basically is to create what I call subject-driven narrative, which is probably much more, in some ways, correlative to documentary film and what you might see coming out of Hollywood than actually conventional broadcast television in some ways. But what we're looking for are strong characters who are able to express themselves well, who have the ability to take us inside of situations which allow us to create a clear storyline narrative arc. And then also, obviously, we can engage them in such a way and observe in sort of a very cinema verite fashion. So there's a sort of openness and a transparency to the situation that's being covered. And those things matter a great deal, particularly in the medical stories. Sometimes we have situations where we may be wanting to work with a medical facility, and we've got buy-in from the PIO, and we've got buy-in from the patients and the doctors involved. But for whatever reason, lawyers have a way of getting involved and, blocking access and limiting the opportunities to really do the kind of direct observation, which in the end is what yields the most powerful form of storytelling that we can do. So one of my, pet requests, I guess, is the way we work is we try to do pre-interviewing of the situations that we're going to be involved in, where we're going to spend a lot of resource effort. I'm going to dispatch a video journalist to work, and typically we work in, unlike television in a lot of ways, we work as one-man band or one-woman band kind of situations, so that the person who's doing the shooting is actually having to do the reporting and do the editing after the fact. So we're looking to make sure that we can have enough time to work successfully. So that pre-interview situation is really pretty critical, and it's where we try to ask the questions that allow us to get a sense of what's possible with the storytelling and to make sure that we can be successful. And we try very hard to communicate on the back what we think we're going to need to be successful. So that's sort of I regard it as sort of a collaboration in that sense, and that we're dancing together to tell the best possible story. In addition, I guess the thing that's obviously very clear is that we have an advantage on the web, I think, in some ways over television, in the sense that we can utilize our video in the context of other displays of visual information that can occur in parallel or simultaneously, and we can sort of unpack this as an experience in a different way than television would have to do it. And so we try to take advantage of that. So I work, for example, in support of stories that Nils and his team may find, I work to try to work with our graphic artists to shape graphics that may go with it or that sort of thing. So we're trying to look at the story as holistically as possible and understand what kind of visual elements we can bring to bear to tell it with as much completeness as we possibly can, accuracy, fidelity, all the journalistic values. Obviously, if you can contribute and give us pieces of that story in a certain way, as was described earlier so well by Karl, that's a big advantage. The challenge is to try to get it at, to use this analogy, and forgive me, but I'm talking to scientists and people who represent scientists, getting it at the right molecular level. If it's too crafted and too polished in some ways, I mean, it's fine. We can present it as, this is coming from an institution or a scientist, and, this is their work, and we display it as such. But there may be times when we actually want to do some of that crafting as well ourselves and integrate it in a different way, because we're trying to tell it within the context and the framework of a slightly larger way of presentation. So we're wrestling right now always with, okay, how complete do we want this package to be? How much of our work are we going to put into it versus taking something sort of whole cloth that's being submitted by, a submitting entity? So that's kind of another part of the conversation that typically goes on. So I think I'll leave it at that, and we can get into questions later.
All right, thanks, Tom. Just as Tom was wrapping up there, it reminded me of my days at Channel 7, in which we would get a lot of videos. Well, not a lot, maybe 20% of the PIOs who would, submit something would say, we've got some kind of video, or, we can provide some kind of graphics for you. And at that time, and this was, a decade or more ago, the big challenge was, do we even bother to accept it because it's coming from this outside entity and it could be too highly crafted? And do we have time to work with our graphics department, which typically was one person who came in at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, to try to make this thing look like we have put a lot of energy into it. So that question that we grapple with about crafting is a really serious one for the news outlet, for the media outlet. But the fascinating thing, going back to what Karl presented to us today, is that, you can use that to your advantage in so many ways. So once again, this tightrope that we're walking on, I'm hoping that, you're getting ideas about how to make things work for your organizations, for your scientists, for your researchers, that makes this all thread together well, because it is a very challenging time. One of the things that has not gone away, including newspapers, is radio. And our next speaker comes from that world, from Voice of America. If you will, please welcome Art Chimes.
Thank you, and bear with me a moment while we get organized for a very, very small presentation here. Thanks very much for coming, and thanks very much for inviting me. Voice of America, I'm going to be a little more nuts and bolts, I think, than the people who have spoken before me, because I produce a radio show every week, so I'm in the trenches, so to speak. I want to tell you a little bit about Voice of America, because we're not, frankly, as well known as the Washington Post, at least in this country, probably a little better known in China and Nigeria and Haiti and Vietnam and some of the other places where we have something like 134 million listeners every week. And our audience is, of course, listening on the radio, as they always have since we got started back in World War II, actually in 1942 when we first went on the air. But increasingly, they're watching our television broadcasts, some direct satellite broadcasts, and some through local affiliates around the world, and also, of course, online. And our website, voanews.com, I don't have any metrics on that, but we probably don't pull in 134 million people a week, but it's a considerable audience. It's also, for the first time, a way that Americans can find out what the Voice of America, which is a U.S. government agency, your tax dollars at work, thank you, what the Voice of America is telling the world on their behalf. So we get a lot of Americans who are checking out our website at voanews.com and seeing either to just see what we are telling the world or for the information and value it has for them. We were actually on the web, well, we were on the internet. We think we were the first international news organization on the internet providing free content before there was a World Wide Web. We had a Gopher server, if anyone remembers those. It was a basic text-based way of putting news and information out on the internet back almost 20 years ago. So that is the Voice of America. So, as I said, I do a weekly radio show. It's called Our World. It runs just a little under a half hour. We cover science, technology, health, the environment, space, a little bit of everything that we try to cram in there. And obviously, there's a lot of gatekeeping that goes on because we can't come anywhere near to covering the week's news. We do a little historical curiosity. The show is actually produced in our features branch, and traditionally it had been more of a features-oriented show. The newscast during the week would do the science stuff, and then the weekly Our World show would do the features. When I came in about 4.5 years ago, we made it a lot more newsy, which is good for you because that's the sort of things that we depend on the public information officers that are here in this room to help us with. Things we like. EurekAlert. I say that not because EurekAlert is one of the hosts here, but because I started science reporting 20 years ago. Took some time off and came back to it. But back in the day, you toted around a Sony 5000 cassette recorder, and you edited your audio on quarter-inch tape. And now, of course, it's different. You know, we record digitally, and if I need a piece of audio from a researcher in California or Caledonia, it's there instantly. And it makes a big difference because we can be a lot more timely and more efficient. Emails, like everyone else, I get hundreds a week, and I do look at every one. I won't say I read every one. I do look at every one. It's really great if the email subject line is helpful. You'd be surprised how often they are not. I get emails where the from line says press office or media relations or something equally unhelpful. I don't want to be insulting anybody here. I'm giving you some actual real-world examples. I'm sure nobody in this room would do anything like that. But we don't do a lot of stories based on pitches so much. And actually, I have to say that EurekAlert has really changed a lot the way we can
in one place, on one website, troll around for, is that a good word? Well, we troll around for what's happening, and it does make an enormous difference. As I said, we don't do too many stories that are based on a direct pitch, whether it's email or otherwise. But we do like pitches that look like somebody thought about whether this is appropriate for the Voice of America. So our audience is international. It's mostly in the developing countries of Africa and Asia. So, for example, if you've got a story about Botox, probably not for our audience. Malaria, tuberculosis, HIV/AIDS, absolutely. We like to hear about those. If you have photos or video, or audio, in fact, that you can share, that is great to know, and it's great to know in advance. Keep them, put them on your website. We might not use it, the next guy might, or somebody who's in the public, as we heard, might be picked up and put on YouTube and get on the Today Show. Who knows? But be proactive and let us know that the information is out there, which means you have to talk to your researchers, of course, and find out what they have and perhaps do a little gatekeeping of your own. On photos, keep in mind that what looks good in a magazine may not look good on a website. There's resolution issues. I'm not a photo editor, but you need to consult your photo editors because sometimes it is just inappropriate, both resolution and composition-wise. If you've got a TV or radio studio, many of you do, let us know and let the researchers know too, because often we're communicating directly with the investigators rather than going through you, and you probably don't like that, but that's what happens a lot of times. So often the researcher, him or herself, might be the one to say, we've got this radio studio we can use. Would this be better on an ISDN line? That's really helpful. And sometimes there are costs involved, and that's okay. We understand that. But please make the paperwork as easy as possible. Sometimes that's the real obstacle. I do science questions from listeners that we get from listeners from time to time. I wish I had a chance to do more of them because it's a really great programming thing. That often means running around and saying, who's an expert in this particular subject that I've never reported on before? And so oftentimes I will, I have to say, almost randomly say, well, I haven't had anybody from Texas on in a while, so let's see what UT has on this particular subject matter. A lot of you do have expert guides, and you know in your offices who your experts are in a particular subject matter. But sometimes it's a lot easier, particularly if I'm doing this on off hours, to look on the website. So if you have an expert guide, think about putting it online if you don't already have that. I have found that in some cases, astonishingly difficult to penetrate a website and find where your office is on the website, where your homepage is. Often university websites, for example, are organized in terms of the customer. So here's the link for faculty, here's the link for students, for parents. Figuring out where the public relations office, or is it called the community relations, or is it called public information? It can be, do a little user testing. Invite somebody in who's not affiliated and just sit them down in front of the computer and say, can you find our office here? And you're a journalist. See how that works for you. You might find that it is surprising. I alluded to this before. If it's a pitch on something that is completely wrong for us, it's a waste of your time, and it's not very helpful for us, too. So I know everyone has mailing lists, and you go out to a lot of media, and if it's possible, think about flagging or subdividing the mailing list so that you have a subdivision of your mailing list that will go to people who are national media, some to local people, because obviously stories that are good for one are not necessarily right for the other. I don't mind too much information that comes in as snail mail or phone calls or even faxes. Snail mail is a problem for us because we're in a government building, and after the anthrax scares, all our mail gets irradiated. I don't know actually how it gets done or where, and sometimes it comes in rather unpleasant form after it's been messed up by the radiation. But the point is, it comes in late, and that takes about a week. So sometimes if you send out a mailing and it says, this is going to be great on the 17th, and we get it on the 19th, not helpful. So let's see here. Telephone press conferences. Who does telephone press conferences here? Quite a few.
They're very efficient. They're very useful in a lot of ways. It's cost effective, both for you and for us, but it is also something that provides pretty marginal audio in a lot of cases, and often just the sound bite you want is when somebody on an open mic is tapping on their keyboard. One thing you can do, and I've done this at some actual events that I've gone to in person that were telephone press conferences, is to record the event live and then put that recording up on your website or on an FTP server, probably on a website because it's something the public might want to know as well. And that way we can pull it down and mix it together, and so we get great audio, and there's not too much extra cost involved. I mentioned doing interviews in a radio studio or a television studio. There's an old technology that sometimes can work as well. It's called tape sync, where I'm doing an interview with somebody on the telephone in my studio, but at the same time somebody is recording, making a good quality recording of the person at the other end of the phone. And then used to be you'd FedEx the tape. Now it can be just done as an FTP transfer. But these new digital recorders, as Karl said, are $100, $150. You don't have to be a professional recordist. The sound is wonderful, and it's really easy to just flip out that USB connector and put it into your computer or upload it. So I've got some contact information if you want to get in touch. And thank you very much. I look forward to the Q&A. I don't know where we're going from there.
Thank you. Our final speaker is Jorge Ribas. Jorge, I don't know if you need to do anything here with the laptop, if you were able to get everything loaded.
Yeah, I got it.
He's ready. Okay. Jorge is an online producer with Discovery News, and he's here to share his expertise. Don't go away. It's your turn. Welcome him.
Thank you very much for having me here. Let's set this up. Okay. I'm sure all of you have heard of Discovery Channel, and I'm sure none of you have heard of Discovery News, maybe a small portion of it. We are exclusively online. We're the science news online division of Discovery Channel. We focus on everything from sorry about that. Yeah. Oh, no, I just want to move. Sorry.
Savior, Patrick.
Just try that. I wish I could help you. Just moving it. Hit F5. Okay. All right. Sorry about that. I'm a video editor, producer, reporter. They call us predators. I don't really like that name, but that's something they've kind of attached to us. It's kind of an all-in-one package, and basically, we'll go out and I'll cover stories from the beginning to the end. I'll read the pitch or the press release. I'll interview I'll talk to the PIO. I'll go out in the field, I interview the researcher. I get back to my office with all the footage I shot, which sometimes is way too many tapes for a 3-minute segment, and I'll sit there at Final Cut Pro and edit it till it's done. We cover at Discovery News. We cover everything from technology, space, archaeology, environmental sciences. I'm going to start out with something that's fresh on my mind as a recent collaboration, a recent case study I had, a really great moment I had with some PIO and researchers, and it's with the Nature Conservancy. I'd worked with the Nature Conservancy before. I got an email from their PIO saying he had this guy in Arkansas who was doing work in the Ozarks in these caves, and that if I wanted to, if I was interested in meeting with him. So I flew down there. He set it up with interviews with this researcher. And I spent 3 days in caves crawling around on my hands and knees with this guy who was obsessed with looking at tiny little bugs and bats and all these creepy crawlies in the Ozarks. And one thing I learned about video is really like when you get only like that 30-second minute with someone, you don't get that quote that you need. But when you spend 3 days in a cave with someone, you're going to get lots of juicy material. So those are the types of assignments for me as a multimedia reporter, as someone who's doing web video, that you get these engaging, in-depth pieces. And with science, that's so important, I think. I mean, you're connecting the audience to this researcher. It's not just about the research. It's really about the person involved as well, and that access. The PIO letting me sit there for hours and and ask them whatever questions came on my mind. I didn't have someone that, you can't ask that, or, you shouldn't do that. That was perfect. I think the challenges that I face as a reporter for science, as a multimedia reporter, is you need the audience to connect to this information. And that can be anything. I mean, it could be something like that they find funny. The Mentos, I think there was an old Mentos YouTube video where the guys are making the soda pop up. That's a science video, really. I mean, and people love that. Or it can be something in the bigger picture that affects them longer term. I think finding that connection is key. And I think part of that, like I said before, is connecting them to these scientists. So some of the most amazing people I've met doing this job is the people that work on this. They're passionate. They're really involved in their science. So much so that we actually started kind of a mini segment on Discovery News called Cool Jobs, because these guys had so many interesting things to say, and it was all ending up on the cutting room floor that it was just a waste of material not to use it. I think it's said a couple times here that there's a really severe lack of science news out there, and it's sad to see that newsrooms are getting cut down with their science reporting, because it's so important, especially now. I think it's even more important than it's ever been. And I think that's where you come in. There's so much fascinating research out there still. There's so much that's going unreported that I think that's where you come in to give us that information. Okay, so, all right, let's just get to pitches. For me, it's kind of traditional, but emails are still the best way that I get pitches, that I get information from you. And we use EurekAlert a lot. I think that was mentioned earlier here today, and kind of go through everything we see there. But just getting a good email from somebody saying, hey, here's something new that's going on, and getting right to the point of what the research is. If you get kind of bogged down with all the stats and the information too soon, you need that hook, you need that lead, you need the headline, something that grabs my attention right away. If you can provide multimedia in the email, or if you can provide a link to some multimedia, to some photos and some video that I can see that you've shot in the field, or some researchers have shot, even if it's raw, unfiltered video, that's perfect. It gets me, I can take that information to my editor and say, this is a good story, we should go with this. Obviously, as a video producer, I want to be able to show viewers what the research and what the scientists are working on, rather than someone sitting in an office talking about, if I'd done the cave researcher and he was talking about spending his time in caves rather than me being actually in one with him, it would have been a pretty horrible video. So it definitely, for a multimedia reporter, giving us a press release, it requires more than just a written press release. Visuals are particularly important. And earlier today we heard about, how you can produce video on site. And it really, I use one of the big cameras with a lot of buttons, but we do have one of those flip cameras that you can just go out there, and we've gotten footage from researchers in China, I did a story in North Carolina where they were looking for some sunken German U-boats, and I found they had video of the divers going down by the U-boats. It was this spectacular HD footage that they let us use in our video. I couldn't dive down with them. I could be on the boat with them, but not dive down. So this kind of stuff just makes your videos pop. It makes this information pop to the viewer, to everybody. And granted, you still have to provide the detailed information, the statistics, the data, the backgrounds on the researchers, the history that's involved in the project that they're working on. All that information is key still, but we're kind of entering an area where the multimedia aspect of the visuals is a very key component as well. It was talked about earlier that we get videos sometimes that has been edited. Lower thirds have been put in. There's music kind of in the background, and it almost becomes very difficult for me as an editor to use that material. I kind of have to cut out a lot of that stuff to put it on our website. So, and it actually makes your job easier too. Is just it can be completely raw video. You can send me a 10-minute unedited clip of work being done or a researcher interview, and that's perfect to me, rather than something that's been cut with all these fancy graphics and things like that we just can't really use. Sending us the footage, we still get stuff. We get stuff by mail on a CD, Or we have, we set up an FTP for researchers like this gentleman in China who sent us, uploaded it on our server. We were accessing it from there. And really, all that stuff, this footage can be used not even by just me, but for our website. We have text reporters who use this stuff to boost their text stories. They'll put like a raw, unedited video to go along with something that they've worked on, that they've written the story, audio slideshows, and things like that. One of the things that I think I've learned also on this job is that there's so much science news out there that we had to almost kind of invent ways to get this information out there. And we started a podcast. It was me and my two coworkers. We were reading EurekAlert, finding all these really interesting research that we just didn't have time to cover. So we decided to make kind of like a game show podcast where we would read, each of us would pick 3 interesting kind of offbeat science stories, read them, and then we'd had voters, choose their favorite. And it started with, kind of this goofy podcast, and it's actually growing. We're getting, I think, like 10,000 downloads on iTunes now. We get, somebody set up a Facebook group page for us where people are writing in from all over telling us how much they like the show, where they're writing from, they're posting comments, their favorite stories, their least favorite stories, when I talk too much, et cetera, like that. My last example I want to do is just I mentioned this German U-boat, and to me this was a perfect example of how you guys can present this information to us. I saw a notice on EurekAlert one afternoon about how NOAA was sending people out to dive for these German U-boats. The press release in EurekAlert had links to the website, which had staff blogs. It had great underwater, that HD footage I was talking about, photos, all this information available that right there at my desk, I was able to access this, and it immediately hooked me on the story. So I called the PIO and set all this up. I was able to go out on a boat with these guys while they were doing research for this. And to me, if this had been just a plain press release with no links, with no information, it still would have been interesting to me, but it probably wouldn't have sold me as it did, and it would have been harder for me to get this information and get this story rolling, really. So to me, this is just a perfect example of this information. It's not really that difficult, the researchers were out there already. They had access to computers. They started blogging about what they were working on. And I think things like this and setting up things like this can really make science accessible to me, and then for me to spread it around. And I guess I'll save the rest for the Q&A. Thanks.
Wow, you're good. You're efficient. I'll give it to you. We're ahead of schedule. Proud to report. That doesn't usually happen. That's why I'm excited about that. We do have time for plenty of Q&A, so I hope that you came prepared with some questions. I know that our panelists will do the absolute best to answer any of your inquiries and to, give you a sense as to what works well for them to help you do your jobs more efficiently. I do like to take a little bit of a poll at this point just to get a sense of who's in the room. Predominantly, obviously, we have public information officers. Anybody here that is not a PIO? And you represent? Johns Hopkins, but not a PIO. Someone else raise their hand over here. Yes, ma'am. I didn't hear the beginning. She does science communication research. Yes, sir. Web manager videographer. Independent. With an institution. Okay. Got it. Yes, ma'am. On the web team, okay. And here in the red, yes? Digital project manager. Okay, so we have a nice little variety. Okay, one more little pop quiz for you. Primarily government agencies. Please raise your hand. Okay, and hospital agencies? Specifically university. Okay, and anybody else? Various associations. Okay, forgive me. Okay, so we've got a nice blend in the room. And I think it's really kind of fascinating that we have, sort of the web presence in the audience as well, because I don't think that has happened at our previous meetings, these particular sessions. So that does show that we're moving forward, and it's a good time to be addressing these issues. I would ask you, we have 2 microphones in the audience, and one is here with Rockman, and there's a young lady here. If you have a question, we would ask, or a comment, we would ask that you please stand so that we can see you. State your name and affiliation. And if you want to direct it to a specific panelist or speaker, please let us know that. We're going to try to keep moving so we can get everybody in, but we do have a good amount of time. So who would like to be the first? This gentleman right in the front. If you'll wait for the microphone to come to you. And again, just a reminder that we do have the studio afterwards if you want to share your comments with EurekAlert about what a fabulous job they do and the great idea of being able to put your videos up on their website. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Doug Dollamore with the American Chemical Society. Actually, I have a couple questions. One is for Karl. I noticed on your archive site it has an invitation for people to post their own videos, and I'm wondering how that works. And also, possibly for Art and Karl, there's something that I've heard about recently, internet radio, that people actually start their own radio stations and have a small audience, and I'm wondering if that is worthwhile pursuing as an institution.
Okay. The page I showed you is from our internal daily web publication called Duke Today, and that invitation to submit videos is aimed at the Duke community. It is not an open door where people can just fill out a form and post. They basically send us an email and say, hey, I got a video, and then we have to do all the massaging to make it happen. But we're asking our campus to help us and show us the videos they've got.
You want me to take the internet radio?
Sure.
Sure, do it. There's not much of a downside. Everyone's a producer these days, and the tools of doing radio are, if anything, even more easy and accessible and cheap than doing television. The one advantage is that you can reach an audience and also have the opportunity of a lot of pass-along audience as well. So if you do it right and it strikes a chord, you can reach a multiplied audience.
How's that different than a podcast?
Boy, that's a good question. I don't know.
Any of our panelists know the difference between
I think
radio,
it's more
internet show, and a
nomenclature
podcast?
than anything else, or perhaps just the way it is displayed. But content-wise, I would imagine it could be the same. Podcast covers a pretty broad swath of programming types, from a couple guys in the basement to professionally produced material that is on the air and then downloadable. So I would say that I don't know, same thing. I think.
Actually, we have and a clarification on the podcast, I'm sure.
Hi, my name is John Strom. I'm with the Carnegie Institution, and my understanding is the difference between podcast and internet radio is a podcast is something you download as a particular separate file or piece of information, whereas internet radio is a constant stream, so something you can get into. I mean, there's constantly information coming across the internet, just as you find with a radio station. The question I have, though, is something that I want to ask Mr. Bates, and that's, as you say, you aim for 90 seconds, basically, for the length of your presentations.
Yeah.
And yet the pieces you showed us that are the most successful are actually longer than that.
That is correct.
I checked a few weeks ago, and the most popular videos on YouTube, for instance, are 7 to 9 minutes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So how do you reconcile, you're aiming for 90 seconds?
Well, would we have a better chance of being viral if we made all of our videos longer? I doubt it.
I guess the point is it ultimately boils down to content, though, right?
You bet. Absolutely. Okay. And yes, if there's a story that really requires 4 minutes, we would do that. Yeah.
I think actually 90 seconds is sort of a traditional time period in regards to how long the average person can pay attention to something in regards to news. Certainly in television news, 90 seconds has been the key time period. If you can make it shorter, great. But people are probably not going to stay with the story much longer than that. I see in hand way over in the corner, and I promise to get the fringes. So if there's anybody to my right who is also interested in having your question answered, please just kind of flag me a little bit. But for right now, we'll go to the lady right over here.
Hi, I represent the Johns Hopkins Institute for Nanobiotechnology. And since nanobio is really tiny, we've been trying to come up with ways to help people visualize this. We have a web director who is also a full-time 3D animator. And I've also been creating short videos on nanotechnology-related topics. They're not linked to any particular news release, so they're sort of evergreen. What I want to know is, are we wasting our time doing this? Because our web director is really reluctant to allow, he doesn't want anyone to come and sort of grab that video off of our website. He has blocked it with digital rights management, and I don't know all the terms that he uses, but anyway, no one can take the videos off of our website. I mean, if you want to contact us and use a portion of the video or get a raw version of the video or the animation, we can do that. But we have them up there so that they're complete stories, so people can click on it and, watch how a particular process works. And what I want to know is, are those kinds of things useful, or should we really just be linking back to the researchers' raw footage or computational images or, their own animations, or should we really be spending our time doing these videos or doing these animations?
If I could just comment. I mean, I think that in certain circumstances I could absolutely see how that could be valuable to us and useful in terms of our own presentation of exploring that topic. I think you may be missing an opportunity, though, to consider utilizing other networks to distribute your information, and hoarding and holding it close like that, I think, is increasingly less valuable as a concept for most institutions. I mean, I would actually be advocating going in the opposite direction of trying to get it out to go viral, because I think it could be probably, if it's done well, and I assume that it would be, that kind of visualization is actually very compelling, and I think people would find it interesting in the same way that people would find some of the things that you saw this morning on YouTube interesting. I think that's really a missed opportunity if you're not doing that.
I think just to add to that, I think a successful model is the way. No, sorry about that. Is the way NASA. They have these animations, and you can access this footage. And I mean, when you're doing video stories about space, it's hard to get that visual usually, and especially something that's shooting off, to Mars, a rover. And they have this information. They have these animations, these great crafted animations that you can use and download and use them for everywhere. So I think that that's a good model to go on, and getting that information out there, getting those videos out there, I think is the way to go.
A lot of folks have a concern about loss of control. Certainly the shrimp guys would have been horrified to think about what would happen in the video. But there's an elegant solution to that, and that is to put that little watermark bug right on the video. Everything we put out has a little Duke logo on it, because when they're open like that and you have embed code and YouTube is picking it up, we don't care how many times it gets cloned. It's always going to have our bug on it, and that may solve your guys' solution, your guys' concern. Your brand can be on that thing no matter where it goes.
This is obviously a popular question. I want to come at it from a slightly different perspective. From time to time, nanotechnology is very much in the news. The reports come up periodically. There was one this week about whether the regulatory regime for that is adequate, and it's a subject that we've actually covered in the past. If you know something like that is coming, it would be very useful to get an email from you saying, hey, you may be doing a story on this report that's coming out in 2 days. You might be interested to know we have some really cool video that you could use to illustrate that on the website. That would be a great way to exploit that.
He called it branding in TV. We call it a bug. CNN, Channel 7, Channel 9 News, it's always there.
Yeah, people are used to seeing it.
You own it. People just know it came from you.
And I asked media who are interested in our videos, do you mind if we have our bug on it? And they said, no problem. It's fine.
I hope that helps. Yes, ma'am. We're getting a microphone to you. We might have to get you some roller skates, Rockman.
Hi, I have 2 questions for any of the journalists. First,
if you would mind, please, your name and affiliation.
Heather Jameson. I'm with Research America. We're an advocacy group for medical research. First, to what extent do you look at publications like Science Magazine, sort of the science trade journals for story ideas? You've talked about EurekAlert. And my second question, my organization deals a lot with science policy, so I'm just wondering sort of, to what extent do you cover issues like that? And we look at medical research broadly versus, specific science topics.
Maybe Tom or Nils could lead us off.
It's remarkable how infrequently I actually look at a paper journal these days. I obviously get through EurekAlert and other services, I'm flagged on an awful lot of that content, and sometimes that leads me to the actual website where I will see other stuff. But I almost never am leafing through a journal the way I used to. It just doesn't happen. In fact, there's only maybe a couple that we even get physically anymore. It's really all over by email and over the web. And I'm sorry, I lost track of your second question.
Science policy.
Yeah, we certainly are interested in science policy questions. It's I lost my best reporter on that last summer with the last buyout, and I'm still working on ways to gear up to do it better. We expect that, particularly with this new administration coming in, there's going to be a lot to be written about on science policy, and it's something we're going to be focusing on.
I would say, from my point of view, it's an area that I get interested in is trying to figure out how to humanize and bring to the fore some of the issues that are being expressed, and that's when I mentioned earlier about character development. That's a good example where if there's somebody who's particularly articulate or is doing something, actually advocating, say, for example, a science policy, sometimes that can be an interesting avenue for us to pursue visually as a story.
I would add that science policy for us at VOA, we do some of it. It has to appeal in some way to an international audience. We gave up our hard copy subscription to Science several years ago, and I access it via EurekAlert. Look at the press releases there.
Good. Okay. First of all, let me find the people with the microphones back here. Okay, and once more with this lady. I think you were one of the first to raise your hand, so if we can get someone to this lady, that'd be great. She's coming. And would you mind standing? That'll help her find you.
Hi, I'm Kidda McPherson. I'm with Princeton University. How are you? Thank you for the presentations. They're really wonderful. I know we're all here. I have a print background, and so I'm a writer, and I'm learning about all this stuff, and that's, I think, why everyone is here. But I wanted to ask anyone who wants to answer this. Here we are writing these things and putting shrimp on treadmills and that kind of thing. And I'm wondering, I know what it used to be like when I read a story in the New York Times or the Washington Post, and it was very complete and it was linear, and we learned a lot from that. What are we creating now? What are we learning from what we put out there on the internet and all these visuals? What's the takeaway from that? Are people still being educated about science? What are your thoughts about the good and the bad of what they're getting from this new kind of communication? Thank you.
I can go first. It's both. It's good and bad. What I like about web video and the short format of it is you can get, in 90 seconds of video, you can see the researcher and hear the passion in her voice and see her in her setting in a way that I probably couldn't capture in 1,000 words of prose. The Journalism School 101 show, don't tell. Web video does that to a really great degree. Ditto for the animations or the scientific visualizations that people are producing. You can get an awful lot of work done in a very short period now that we have multimedia at our disposal. You know how hard it is to describe something when all you've got is text. It's part of why I got restless in newspapers. I got frustrated that I could only do so much with print. But yeah, the downside is, people are reading your wonderfully well-constructed story on a 3-inch screen on their BlackBerry, and they're just, it's a force too big for me to resist. I mean, you got to go with the flow. People are bombarded with content, and it's shorter and quicker and coming at them from every direction. I don't know the answer.
I'm going to drag Jorge into this because one of your comments actually triggered a thought for me, which was so often we would go out and interview researchers, and you've got 15 minutes of great stuff. And I don't know about those of you who are in the audience, but as a reporter, it's not that frequently that we find researchers who are passionately articulate for television. They're pretty good in the lab, but oftentimes, it doesn't come across in their personality. So when you get somebody like that and you've got a good 15 minutes and you can only use a 90-second story, which means their bite is down to 10 seconds or less, if they can describe, the specifics of physics in that, maybe they're rapping, I don't know, things change. But the point being that Jorge then took that to the next level, he and his team, having an opportunity for viewers to get, or online readers, whatever we're calling them these days, to get even more information based on the fact that they then take all of that information that they couldn't ordinarily use, which would end up wasted.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think that that what this does now is just allow us to have more, we could still do fabulous print articles. I mean, they're online. I still call them print articles, and then combine that with video, maybe a sidebar video of one of these researchers talking about, an amazing experience he or she may have had somewhere that wouldn't have fit into the article, but you can see the researcher explaining something in a passionate way. And I think that's what I've taken from this. And I started out as a traditional print journalist as well, and moved over to this side of it. And I think that's what I found is that we can just put more out there. And sometimes it's something sort of silly like the shrimp, but there's real research behind what the shrimp is doing. I mean, it is goofy and you can laugh, but there is something happening there, and these guys are actually doing something. And I think that's okay. I think we have to, I don't know, it's going to sound cheesy, but science can be fun or something like that. But I think that's all right.
Can I add also that I think you're also reaching new audiences this way. The people who are guffawing over the Benny Hill version of the shrimp are probably not the ones who are reading the Tuesday Science section in the New York Times. So I don't think that you're taking away so much as adding.
I was just going to say that I'm a prime example. I come from a family with dyslexia running through the gene pool in a pre-pronounced way, and for me, getting through words often is really hard. So, seeing content presented visually, it enables me to understand it more readily, quickly, and also I think if it's really well crafted, at least in the video side of it, if you've got a compelling story to tell, people are going to really bond to that story emotionally, and they're going to make an effort to really process it and internalize it and make it, make that the understandings that emerge from it more part of their life, I think, than if they didn't have the opportunity to have that kind of experience.
One other thought is just the words themselves have such a larger audience thanks to the web than they used to. What do we have, 10 times the audience online that we have actually pick up the physical Washington Post? I mean, that's a huge advantage. Furthermore, it's international. And science, of course, is international. So while having the resources to deliver those words is increasingly a problem, when they're there, we are reaching far, far more people than we ever used to.
If I could just throw in a plug for a couple of websites right now that would, I think, kind of address the potentiality of this in some ways. There's a site called 10,000words.net, and then there's a Spanish language site that I think is actually quite good called Haga Click para Continuar.com. And both of those are basically sites that are devoted to showing presentation of information, graphics, and video in related ways. And they offer techniques for how to at least in the 10,000words.net, they offer pretty strong explications of how to produce it. But I think that they're really sources of inspiration. So if some of you are struggling with the politics internally of your organizations in a way where people are not necessarily appreciating the value of some of this new media, those are sites to direct them to that would, I think, show some shining examples of where it's really working well.
One of the things I think is fascinating is that we may not have started as individuals in print media, but almost everybody's going to have to go to video and audio. It just has to happen. It's already there, and if you, for some reason, drag your feet, resist, you're going to get left behind, particularly in this world of new media. So it's absolutely, it's just pertinent to your existence. Yes, back in the corner. That's all right, sir. We'll come to you next.
Hi, my name is Gary Schroeder. I'm with Brookhaven National Laboratory. I run the Web Services Group. I wanted to share a story about video. I hear some sentiment about concern that perhaps the science is being dumbed down through online video, which is a collapsed form of communication. We have a bunch of very staid scientists running a large particle accelerator at our site. They're not really interested in being shown online or sometimes on TV. But when that LHC rap video came out, they came to the communications organization. They said, "Why don't we have that?"
Right. Right.
Okay. when they saw how popular it was, even though to them that's a very lowbrow. It's a student doing a rap video to a very prestigious accelerator. They would never have agreed to that beforehand. Mm-hmm. But when they saw the publicity and the intense scrutiny on that video that brought, they wanted to be a part of it. So it's for those of you who are working to get people to buy into the concept of being shown online, they kind of need to see an example of how they can really benefit before they may accept it.
So you're working on your rapping skills?
No.
The gentleman at the table just there. Yes, sir.
Anthony Sochi, American Meteorological Society. I heard, or I think I heard, a number of you say that you've migrated over as the trend has been from paper to digital. But do you end up reading the same content or the same amount digitally that you did when it was in paper form, or are you finding that you're reading much less?
I think I actually read more than I used to. You mean just digital versions of what would be in print? Yeah, I think I read more. I think I scan more. I mean, I think it's tricky that you may not read as long. You may not finish the article. But I think I scan more and I read more. I'll check Dig, sites like that, stumble upon and find things that are out there. And I think that's what I'm doing.
I think like Jorge, I probably read differently rather than more or less. But one thing about having all these sources available online is that I'm exposed, I think all of us are, exposed to a lot more material than we used to be. I might not read an article in Science start to finish. Well, actually, I never did very much. But I'm not a scientist. I'm a journalist. But I'm exposed to a lot more things. And from my point of view, that means that's that many more potential stories that I might be able to sniff out. But I don't think, once I've identified something as a potential story, I don't think the depth to which I'm going to go into it has changed.
I'm going to play to my right now, and I know that I have a microphone that's coming to this direction. If we could get, yes, please, come to the front table here. Sir, if you wouldn't mind standing.
Hi, I'm Mitch Merkin with the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. As research institutions get better at doing their own multimedia packages, so in theory you could go to a university website or a government agency website and they have a state-of-the-art package, well-written story, graphics, video, everything's well done. What does that do to your role? And at some point, does it go back to square one where you talked about the issue of maintaining your journalistic integrity and credibility? If you can just provide your readers with nothing but a link and they go to the research institution, everything's there, you at some point have to take a step back and say, wait a second, we have to be doing this stuff. We don't want everything, prepackaged for us.
The death of journalists, Mitch. Is that what we're predicting here? Colleagues?
Well, let me say that we, even if we see something that looks cool, we always evaluate it, with a journalistic eye. And we ask ourselves, does this really serve the interests of the reader in terms of the quality in information, the lack of cant or bias and so forth? We're not just going to use something because it's there and because it looks cool. In terms of whether, when you see that whole package, this is where I really, I turn things over to Tom's people. They, not only do we look at it, those of us say at the paper, but our colleagues over there are also looking at it in terms of other values that we're not so good on. But I certainly don't think we cede our role as evaluators and our cool, hopefully cold journalistic eye when we see these things.
I would, just echo Nils on that. I think we're looking at a landscape potentially, and obviously this is, to some degree still being reformed in a sense, but I think that we see ourselves in a role almost as of filtering agents and guides, if you will. And, with the kind of scrutiny, journalistic scrutiny that Nils was just mentioning, and I think that may be part of our role in the future in a more pronounced way as material becomes so massively more available. But I would also point out that in a lot of cases, news organizations have a much bigger intrinsic audience at this point still than individual institutions, and so it's still a matter of getting audience to information, and I think we still have a role to play in that as well.
I don't know. I'm going to challenge my colleagues a little bit on this one because I do think that's a kind of a fascinating conundrum in that, for example, this particular election year, more than any other, used the internet to really kind of bypass, if you will, the traditional political machines, et cetera, et cetera. And there is a point at which one has to wonder, I mean, newspapers have not gone the wayside of dinosaurs, but we've been predicting it for quite a while. Radio is an extremely older, if you will, senior medium. Television, even in itself as regular newscasts, is often outweighed by the number of people who will go to a website. I mean, that's why everybody has to have one, because it is the new way of speaking. And so do you really need that journalistic filter, or can you just go to the immediate source? Can you just go to NOAA or NIH or any other agency, Veterans Affairs, whomever it is, and, skip the people who are on this panel?
I think, sorry.
Go ahead.
I think one of the things that I think you make a good point, and I think one of the things that's tough, and it kind of saddens me a little bit, is if you wanted to, you could go to a website that expressed solely your views, and you would talk to people that had the same opinions you had, whether it was political or anything else, and never have to read the other side of the story. I mean, there's websites, there's liberal, conservative, every kind of website you can imagine, and I think that our role still is to. It gets trickier with online when you have blogs and you have all these things. Everyone someone you said it, I think everyone's a producer now. Everyone can put up their own content. But I think in terms of what this gentleman was asking, and as things get flashier, and researchers put their stuff out there, I know that sometimes I'll come across a video that's very slick, very well produced, and has interviews in it and everything, and immediately that kind of turns me off. I just won't use it. Because I want to ask my own questions, I mean, it might be great questions. The scientists might have great answers, but I can't feel good about using something like that. So that's my answer there.
I think I would say that when a story is featured on a journalism website as opposed to a news media website, as opposed to on your institution's website, it has additional credibility. When we post stories about research at XYZ University, we usually link back to the lab or to the university website. And often there's more depth and more media and more information than we can do in a short radio story at the university's website. But the fact that somebody who is a journalist has decided that this is a good story and here is our take on it, I think adds credibility that you don't get when it is perceived of, rightly or wrongly, as something of a self-serving or public relations kind of effort. So I'd like to think that we still serve it some value, we add some value to it. But you should continue to do it because you have a lot to add too.
As a university or an institution, I think your strategy in this situation is to put the richest, most complete information you can put up and to be the sort of source material. Yes, the traditional media are doing a great job of being filters, providers of a guidance to help people get where they're going, but there are lots of other non-traditional media that are doing the very same thing. The crowdsourcing, the zeitgeist of the internet will seek out the source material, and they're most interested in finding the original one, not the one that's been cloned 3 times. So I think we're in a transitional period here, obviously. Nobody knows how it's going to come out, but if I were at a federal agency, I'd be doing it the way NASA does, putting up, hundreds of large photos, putting up the white papers, putting up the academic papers, more content than a journalism site could ever put up. And certainly welcome the journalists to point to you and to do summaries of your work, but you have the whole enchilada so that people can find it. It's also the answer to the short versus long thing. It's great to have 500 short versions of your story out everywhere, but somewhere you should have the one big good one, and that's probably up to you to do that.
I want to stay right over here. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Claire Edwards with the American Physiological Society. I was wondering, with all the moving to audio-visual media, do you have any tools or tips for making sure that media is accessible to people with audio or visual impairments?
There are many sites that offer guidance on how to do that. There are ways to get a video transcribed through software, et cetera. But I don't know. I've seen video where they voice over what the action is. It's like the SAP channel on your TV. I don't know that I've ever seen that on the web.
Would certainly speak to having a narrative, though, if you just had slides. Otherwise, people would truly have no concept. But, obviously it's something that's being worked on, I would presume. Yes, right here at this table, this lady.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Weinstein. I'm Public Relations Director at New Jersey Institute of Technology in Newark, New Jersey. I have a short question for Karl at Duke. From a small technological school with a very, very limited public relations and public information staff, me. If you had these limitations, where do you put your energy? The short version to get it out or the long version? The long version takes a lot of time, and I have a lot of researchers with a lot of great information, but their communication skills to just put them out there, and just FYI for the journalists that are there, in a place like NJIT, which has some wonderfully smart people, and Kidda will attest to it as our former wonderful statewide reporter for New Jersey, who ran many, many excellent articles in the Ledger for us. When she would come and interview our people, they're dense and tough to get through to, as I'm sure a lot of the other people dealing with scientists in the room. So one of the things that we need to do is sort of sort out and find the few for you who can tell your story and can give you something to talk about and can make science come alive for you. Where do we put that energy for those of us that are small?
You just took the answer right out of my mouth, actually, and I've been expecting your question. It may mean doing fewer stories, but doing them in a more packaged kind of way so that you put more resources into the visual and the video and that sort of thing, and being more selective about, well, okay, what stories have I got that really can get out the door and go somewhere? I mean, it's a shame to have to spend a ton of time on a story that you know is kind of a non-starter. And if you have limited resources, triage is your only option, I would say. But the good news is this technology is so democratized now that it truly is within the grasp of a person to do at least a rudimentary job of a lot of this stuff. You know, with a laptop and a couple of accessories, you can do an amazing amount of stuff now.
I'm just curious. Okay, and I love that there are hands up, but I wondered how many PIOs are actually using some of the technology that Karl showed us, the recorders with the USB sticks. Anybody using that to do your researchers and get them online? Okay, a few people are. Okay, all right, so it's coming along. This center table, these people are eager to talk. Let's get a microphone over here. Who's going first?
Hi, Brian Rubery with All Health Public Relations. Question for Tom Kennedy. It used to be that the websites for media did no original reporting. They got their stories, of course, from either the paper or from wire services. Has that changed? I mean, I guess the bottom line is there any reason that we would now pitch a web editor?
Well, I can only speak obviously for our organization, but we've been steadily building, reporting capability. And I have a team of 6 video journalists that I supervise who do original reporting. Sometimes it's completely original in the sense that we're not working with a newspaper, but we're doing it on our own. But most often we're working in collaboration with reporters at the newspaper and developing things that way. But yes, I think I think you have to. I guess it depends on our organization right now. As Nils alluded to, we are in the process of merging, but we've always been up to now. We've always been a standalone company. So in that sense, it would make sense to to pitch to us as well. So I hope I'm answering the question. But I foresee the roles that we have for creating video journalism are not going to go away when we merge with a paper. They're going to be accelerated probably because there's more opportunity now than we can get to based on the size of my staff. But, I think that the media companies recognize that they need to have audio and video capability latent in the organization, resident in the organization, to execute going forward.
Next question. How about the gentleman there in the burgundy sweater?
First for
your name, sir, and affiliation.
Steve Schultz from Princeton University Engineering School. So I guess first for Karl, you mentioned comments. Do you have the first question is do you open your videos and other things to comments either on YouTube or on your own sites? And because it's as a PIO, that's could potentially be fraught with issues. And then the second question is completely unrelated for anybody about search optimization and whether you have any. I think about the New York Times decision to remove any barriers. They had time select for a while where you had to pay for content, and part of the reason for that would seem to be driven by the discovery that more traffic was coming through random search than by navigation to their site and the power of their brand originally. So that seems to be a very powerful dynamic, and I wonder if you have any of you have any experiences about things you've learned about optimization, any tips about how to bring your content forward and take advantage of Google.
So the first question was on comments for Karl.
Our Flash player for the videos that we have on Duke servers does not have a comment function, but everything we produce does get posted to YouTube where there is commentary. We don't make any attempt to filter that or control it, and it's been ugly a couple times. We had a video 2 years ago in which one of the guys had a speech impediment, and some of the people on YouTube just went after him, which is ridiculous, and there isn't a lot you can do about that. We have several blogs that we produce from various areas of campus. Those all have commenting. For the blogs I run, I prefer to let the comment post, but then I get an email right away that says it posted, and if it's not to our liking, we take it down. I also run an online research magazine called Duke Research, where we have a comments box on every story. My rule of thumb on comments for text stories, anyway, is that you probably get about one comment for every 1,000 viewers. So it's not a lot of. It would be a nice problem to have at this point, frankly. I'd like to see more comments. But yeah, it's a loss of control. If you read some newspaper sites in particular, there are these gadflies who spend all day in the discussion rooms and they just flame each other, and it's an ugly environment. So it depends on. The short answer is it depends on what your product is like, whether you worry about adverse comments, and there are options for how you can control comments. You can just let them go up unfiltered, or you can look at them first and turn them on.
And then search optimization?
I think it's essential for having content be found, and it really requires a lot of effort and a lot of thought and a lot of concentration to work on. That's probably one of the biggest areas right now that we're working on day after day. We've got people dedicated to looking at analyzing how we're doing our business and whether or not we can improve search engine optimization. I don't think you can completely ever game, Google. Their algorithms are constantly changing and shifting, and it's just not completely possible. But there are definitely things that you can do to enhance your chances of being found, and one of those is obviously a certain kind of repetition pattern with regard to keywords that might relate directly to the material that you're presenting. And really, literally, as you organize your pages, you want to have a certain kind of hierarchy, if you will, that in specific spots those keywords are appearing, because I think that does help your chances somewhat. And obviously, linking in and linking out are also two other variables that are incredibly important to search engine rankings. And the more you can have reputable sources going in both directions, finding and feeding out of your content, that's also going to help considerably.
One thing we did is we just viral our video out to all the video sites you can have. We put stuff on YouTube. We have a bug on it, so it's branded as ours. But YouTube, Current, Blip, there's a million of these video sites now, and people come across it. And they traffic boosts that way. And I think that we have advertising components to that where we generate, from the clicks that we're getting on YouTube. It's not coming to discovery, but we're still generating revenue from that.
Next question, gentleman in the white shirt.
Hi, excuse me. Mike Karlowitz. I'm a science writer for NASA. I want to go back to a question and a philosophy that's sort of come up a little earlier, which is I think some of the discussions overlooking a cultural fact in our field, culture of the field. I'd like to get back to what the panel thinks the role of the PIO should be, because we're overlooking an important thing. It used to be that those of us who were PIOs actually came from a PR school, and journalists were journalists. But the reality is that newspapers are shrinking, all the media are shrinking, and many of your colleagues who are leaving are like me, Kidda, various people here. We were journalists. I don't know. I never know where to draw that line, are or were. So the question is, media are shrinking. You have less staff. You have less time. You have less people. And forgive me for saying it, but many times the reporters that you have, who are supposed to be the filters, have a lot less experience than the PIOs who were 30-year journalists out in the field doing this. So the question is, I have a staff of 4 people, and all of us are journalists who couldn't get the day jobs anymore because there are none. So now we're PIOs. So the question is, and it doesn't need to be adversarial. I guess I'm struggling every day with, so what should our role be? We don't want to overpackage things for you, but on the other hand, a lot of times you can't cover the things because there's too much to cover. So I'd love to explore a little more what the relationship ought to be from your perspective.
Who would like to tackle that first? Let's pick on Nils, shall we?
Well, what ought it to be? Who's to decide that? Karl used the term, I think, democratization of information earlier, and that's really what we're facing. We're just not the only source anymore, not far from it. And how we relate to what you do probably hasn't changed a great deal from my perspective, but obviously you have access to the rest of the world that you never did before, and so that probably imposes some, and fortunately with the background you have, this isn't a problem, but that probably, you could argue that imposes some kind of journalistic responsibility on you that you didn't used to have, because in fact now you are the direct source for a lot of people who may or may never have seen what it is you're putting up in any, traditional media. But I guess it's certainly not for us to decide, that is, people who do what I do, what your role is, but I think that is something you ought to think about, because you're no longer, you're really serving a larger purpose than you used to do.
I guess in a very narrow kind of, for lack of a better way of saying it, selfish way from my perspective, what I'm looking for is, a kind of partnership, because I respect your credentials, I respect your expertise, and I respect the inside knowledge that you're bringing to the area that you're representing. And I am looking for your honest assessment of whether and what you think is valuable for us to be conveying in terms of utilizing multimedia materials, and whether or not you can help us gain access to the situations that we could usefully do. And I think that that kind of credible assessment, and the background that you're representing, is really pretty pivotal in a sense.
Art, did you want to chime in?
Yeah.
It's a little pun. Art chimes. Okay.
I never heard that, Rhea. That's
It's an original.
It's hard when I Google myself because I put in art chimes. I know these wind chimes. Was there a question? Oh, yes. Actually, I would like to turn the question around, if I may, and ask, do you see that people who have come to your profession from journalism approach it differently than people who have come from a public relations background?
The microphone's coming.
my answer is yes. I think we try to bring, at least the folks that I work with, try to bring more of a journalistic sensibility. We run into a different problem than within our institutions, which is that when I want to write things in a journalistic way and have multiple sources and have outside sources, that's not always so favored upon. So I think we need a cultural change from the media, how it pays attention to public information, and our institutions need to realize that just putting out spin doesn't work anymore. You need to think. They are coming. The audience is coming straight to us, and sometimes, and we need to treat things as Tom said, like journalists. We need to still behave that way and apply the same standards.
Yeah, and I think you're right that because people do have now a flood of information, sources that were unimaginable just a few years ago, that there is that kind of reality check, fact checking going on, and if you're trying to put out a puff piece, it's not going to fly. No one's going to believe you. And it diminishes your credibility the next time you wanted to say something.
I think some of the best PIOs I've worked with have actually all been former journalists. For that reason, is that they're not putting out I'm not reading these press releases that sound completely like puff pieces, but that look and that I'm reading, and they do have multiple sources, and there's some good information in there. They're well written. So I think that forming a partnership, that's what I'm always interested in doing, is forming a partnership with certain associations and institutions that have people there that, I know they're still, getting out their information, but that I can work with and I can trust.
I think that part hasn't changed, that we need to have that sense of mutual trust. Back over here, this table back in the back. I know I hadn't really come back to this area, so thank you for being patient.
My name is Kristen Long. I'm from the American Society of Human Genetics, and my question is about webcasting. I know that's not something that we've really gone into too much depth about yet. We have an annual meeting, and I know that with budgets being tight at most media outlets nowadays, it's hard for journalists who aren't in the local area to get there. So I've been doing live webcasting of a couple of my press briefing sessions at our annual meetings. What do you think about webcasting? Is a live webcast something that's worthwhile for us to be doing? Is the audio quality enough for someone to, say, rip and put on the radio or put online? How do you feel about using webcasting?
Tom, do you use webcasts?
Well, I use them in the sense that you're describing as source material to guide me to possible, ideas for stories. But I think, and we do, listen in and look at things regularly. I think it's a whole area that I neglected to mention earlier, and I guess what we're just beginning to utilize tools to begin to open up conversation, and I think that is an important facet that we really haven't necessarily completely spoken to yet. That I'm really, we're seeing a lot of interest in that, and I think what it is that people are interested in seeing actuality play out, for lack of a better way of saying it. And if you can take them to a place where that actuality is playing out and they can see it and they can even possibly find a way in to participate, that is a big draw. And I've seen some really, it's still, I think, in its infancy as in some ways technologically, and it's a little bit more raw and sort of more at times toward the YouTube end of things. But when I see two-way conversation being done by video chat, and and there's a facet and there's an ability for an audience to interact and insert questions and that sort of thing, even if it's coming in via text methods, that's really useful. And I really do think there's a huge future in that as an aspect of organizational presentation.
Q&A. So if you were there in person or remotely, you could type in your question and it gets submitted, which seems to be pretty popular. Yeah. But what's the best way for me to promote that kind of thing to you?
I think just letting us know that it's happening by email. That's generally how I pick up on that. I may have some places bookmarked that I'll go to see if anything's coming up. I'm looking at it often in terms of personally of just things that I know are going to give me information that I can use to apply our craft better. But
And what about live versus recorded?
For what?
Because it costs us more to, stream it to
video
online, live versus just recorded.
I think it really depends on what audience you're seeking to attract and whether you feel that there's a value that can be conferred by going directly to the public as opposed to, offering something after the fact that then is being distributed really for a slightly different reason. I mean, I think that live streaming is just basically about audience, in this particular context, about audience engagement. And there's somehow their act of engaging with you is going to provide some kind of benefit to your organization.
This particular situation, we actually only had media on the live link because it costs money per person. But, there is an advantage to being at the meeting and getting that news that exact moment versus, having to wait a couple hours for them to create the full webcast and post it online. So the people who are not there are getting it a little bit later. Personally, I saw that as a disadvantage for news that's timely, but how do you feel about that?
Well, I think that's the issue is that, it's a question of whether or not there's something that's so red hot that you've got to get it out, quickly. Or, it's something that can, it's not as important either from the standpoint of us, in the media or, your organization.
I'm wondering, Jorge, do you use webcasts at all, or is yours pretty much you are the actuality?
Yeah.
You go out and
We've never used it. I don't think we've ever even tried it, really. I've ever even used it, yeah.
Okay. And Art?
Yeah, we've been on the receiving end of webcasts and use it for news gathering purposes. But you did mention very briefly at the beginning the audio quality, and that can sometimes be an issue. And I've never actually put together a webcast, but I imagine that you can buy different bandwidth levels and for different quality. And sometimes something that is acceptable sounding when you're actually just listening to it on your computer, after it goes through, and in broadcasting there's a whole chain of processing that's involved. But think of it as, they tell you how you shouldn't re-encode an MP3 because a lot of it's been stripped out the first time, and it can sound really bad even if the bit rate is nominally pretty good. Well, it's the same thing when it goes through the broadcast chain, and you really want to start with the best quality material at the beginning, because by the end, when it is received actually at the radio of the listener, it may not be sounding so good.
Okay, for those station, they're live too. When they just plugged into the mult box and it was fine for them, but they recorded separately. So,
okay, thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to very quickly ask Karl, because he's sort of our technological guru on this thing.
I'm a writer. Okay.
He's passing me on to the next question, so we'll just go right on, shall we? Yes, this lady at this table. And as I glance down, we're probably going to wrap up in the next three questions, just based on how long we've had our respondents speak. Go ahead.
Okay. Hi, I'm Jessica Smits with Maryland Sea Grant. And Karl, you touched on this briefly before, but I was wondering if you or any of the other panelists could talk about what you think of having a presence on Facebook.
Well, I'll share my personal rant on it. Web users in general, and Facebook users in particular, are very sensitive to authenticity. And there are an awful lot of efforts out there where officialdom organizations have decided we need a Facebook page. And for my money, that's just kind of a non-starter. I think for the sort of conversational, casual, grapevine kind of environment in Facebook, I don't see those working very well, the ones that I've seen. There are some valuable things you can do with an institutional Facebook page, like making event announcements, issuing invitations, and that kind of thing. So far, I have not stumbled across one that really turned me on. I thought was great.
We had I mentioned that the podcast that we started called the Friday News Feedback, and we had a blog, and we post our podcast every Friday. And one of our listeners created a Facebook group for us. And then, of course, when Discovery got wind and they got a little nervous and wanted to close it down and launch their own official version, but we actually kind of won that battle and convinced them to just leave the user-created one, because there was some authenticity to that the user created it. I think he named us officers of the group or something. I'm not really entirely sure how that works, but it was great to see. Then you see listeners join in, and then we mention it on the podcast a few times, like join up, and we kind of try to do like a march to 1,000 members. But I think that authenticity is genuine, and I think for something like Facebook or MySpace and social networking sites like that, that's very important, rather than this corporate Discovery logo Facebook page that I think would have turned a lot of people off, maybe.
Let's see. Who have I not called on? This lady. Me, pick me. You haven't called on me. The microphone was here earlier. Would you mind standing, ma'am, so she can find you?
Kim Kaplan, Agricultural Research Service, USDA. Let me preface this question by saying I really like all the new bells and whistles, but in terms of reaching the direct public, doesn't using all this video and slideshows and animation mean that we're basically closing out anyone who's still on dial-up?
Is anyone still on dial-up?
Rural America.
There is
right?
a world out there
I'm
that's
teasing,
still on dial-up.
actually, to a certain degree, but yeah, I mean, at some point, television's going digital in February. Everybody knows, right? We're all prepared, at some point. But that was me. Let's hear what they have to say.
Truthfully, yes, I think we are. I mean, I think we kind of made a conscious decision when we started doing streaming video online and doing all these really interesting things that you kind of had to say, all right, well, anyone on 56K still is sorry. I don't know. That's my best answer for that.
I remember when my friends had color TVs and I didn't. You're shutting out that audience. A lot of what we do is very high bandwidth, but if you watch the statistics about the penetration of broadband, it's taken over. It used to be that people did their broadband things at work. But finally, I think in the last year and a half, broadband at home became a bigger market than broadband at work, which is good news for the catalog sites. And Land's End can sell you stuff at 1 a.m. now instead of while you're sitting at your desk. But, the dial-up folks are shut out.
Okay. Let's see. Yes, ma'am. We're going to get a microphone to you in just a moment. And how are we on time here? I know I said 2 or 3, but the respondents are a little bit more concise, so we'll do 3 more questions. Okay?
Mine might be quick. I'm Andrea Boyle with the University of Delaware. My question is kind of a nuts and bolts one, mostly for Tom and Jorge. As far as format, if we're putting video up, and in my mind I would maybe put up one that was a 90-second pre-produced and then also have the raw video available, how would we do it best? Would it be that you would want a DVD? Would you want it in some sort of format online? How would you want it?
Yeah, I mean, if you can download it, like a high-quality QuickTime movie file that I could download directly to my computer and that I can plug into Final Cut and edit that way, that's great. We've also worked out with PIOs where I'll provide them the information for an FTP where they can just give it, send it that way, and not have to worry about putting it online. I think that's probably the best way. And sending something through the mail works if it's not a rush. Sending us a DVD or CD with the format as well, that's fine.
I think generally because speed is relatively an important parameter for us. Echoing Jorge, I'd just as soon have an MOV file FTP'd to me if that's feasible, or be able to alternatively grab it from your site. But that's the quickest way. I like it in the purest, closest to raw state.
Yeah. As big as you can have it without.
As big as you can make it,
right.
That you can tolerate. Because we can arrange for pretty big files to be sent to us.
They're the media. They can manipulate it. Okay. Yes, sir. If you wouldn't mind standing. Okay. And retrieving the microphone. Thank you. All purpose.
Hi. I'm Lee Poston with the World Wildlife Fund. And I have a question. It's kind of a chicken and egg question. Most of our projects are in very, very remote places. They're in the Congo or the Himalayas or places like that. We have a lot of great stories. I've been trying to get the New York Times to do a piece on a project we have in bonobos in the DRC for a long time. We have a lot of stories like this, but with bureaus drying up and with most of the reporters in the field covering things like poverty, war, famine, things like that, it's a big challenge. So my answer to that would be to obviously go out there and gather material, gather digital media, gather audio, interviews, and things like that, which I don't mind doing, by the way. It's a lot of fun. But the question is, if I put it out there and then put it out there in the digital universe, how does that affect my chances of possibly getting something in traditional media like the Times or the Washington Post or things like that after they've seen it all across the web?
Can we start with you, Art, since you're sort of our international online person?
It's interesting, and the cutbacks that you described, it's not new. I was a correspondent in the Middle East and in Eastern Europe in the 90s, and every time I had a kind of interesting story that might have been a science story, might have been a feature, something that didn't involve bang bang, basically, there was always some bang bang story that the editors wanted. So, even if there was a bureau there in the DRC, I'm not sure that the correspondent would be out there with the animals. On the one hand, I'm not sure. I'll leave my colleagues to speak to whether the fact that you have it on your website is going to dissuade them from running the story. I would be, I think, dissuaded from putting together a story based entirely on pieces that you assemble, because I don't really know who you are, and I'm sure you're a great guy and very trustworthy and all that, but I don't like that sort of, I'm not even sure I would call it journalism. I don't like, taking that secondhand information from somebody else who obviously has an interest in getting it out there. That said, there might be a possibility of doing a story where I could do, for example, an interview on maybe a sat phone or something like that with the researcher out in the field, and have that story augmented by some natural sound that was recorded out in the field, or in the case of video, it could be video, and have that conversation as voiceover material. So I'm not sure that you're wasting your time in doing that, but it's something that raises some issues with the integrity of the editorial process, I think.
I guess the question for me is what is the story? Is it just the fact that your people are out there doing interesting research? Well, most of the time, that by itself is not going to be a story. However, if you've got a great paper coming out in Nature about what you've learned about the bonobos or whatever, and you think that might be of interest to me or the Times, then you're telling me that, by the way, if you're interested in the story, we can supply video of our researcher out there with them. That would be an enhancement that would certainly be attractive. But and yes, if you've got a story but you've already splashed it all over the world, that does diminish its attractiveness somewhat.
Okay. Yeah, and I didn't mean to imply that either the Times or the Post or anybody would write a story based on what I gather, but would actually go out there after it's been splashed across the web. So, yeah.
I like Nils's answer. Say, for example, you're in Congo and you're blogging, you're posting photos and you're doing a daily update and whatever. When the time comes that Nature paper comes out and you can attract some traditional media, they then can point back to your blog and this reader can get the whole thing and see the narrative and see more of the pictures, more than would fit in the traditional publication. I wouldn't think it would be a waste of your effort to build a blog like that. You're also talking directly to your audience. You don't so much need the media to pick it up. You're telling your own story.
So it may just be a question of timing. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Molly Williams. I work with Fleischman Hillard. I'm a digital project manager. And my largest client, this is actually very similar to the last exchange we just heard, my largest client is King Abdullah University of Science and Technology out of Saudi Arabia. Not the easiest place to get to. So I guess my question is, I've heard kind of some different opinions here on what kind of material you would use. Again, because Saudi Arabia is not the kind of place that you can just drop in any time of the day. If we do produce material, lab walkthroughs, in-depth material with researchers in the labs in Saudi Arabia, how much of that would you really use? And would you be more likely to use just more traditional B-roll that's been packaged for the web? Have you seen people do that, submit just straight up B-roll for the web, and then you all would conduct some, interviews via phone or things like that to augment the story, but ultimately the B-roll, the static images that we provide is what you'd use?
Yeah, that's actually what I prefer personally, just raw B-roll. And then if we need to call someone and do a phoner from Saudi Arabia or something like that, and then overlay the video onto that you shot. To me that's perfect. I mean, I wish I could fly to Congo and Saudi Arabia. but we can't. So stuff like that is definitely things we can use if there's a good story there.
And you're seeing people submit B-roll packages specifically for the web?
Yeah, more and more, and it's something that I'm starting to see a trend more. And we can't always use it, and some of it is not always really well shot, or it's kind of boring. But I'm definitely seeing more and more of it.
Tom, would you mind weighing in on that?
No, I just totally agree with Jorge. I mean, it's all about the production values and how, in a certain sense, I guess, for lack of a better way of saying it, the rawer the better in terms of the B-roll. In terms of not having a lot of polished, well shot, well lit, all that kind of stuff, but not totally produced. I want to, because we'll probably make it, minimal in terms of the overall packaging. And what I'm interested in and alluding to earlier is just how we can get to live two-way, where B-roll could be insinuated in that context, but make it more of that kind of a presentation.
Okay, if I'm being true to my word, this would be the last question. Who has a great last question? The greatest last question of all time among all these public information officers. Barely one hand remains, so I guess we're going to go with the lady here at the back table. Thank you.
I own this because I'm coming from the Netherlands. So.
Okay.
I'm Frauke Rinks from the Netherlands Institute of Ecology. Well, I'm having my sabbatical in Princeton, so I didn't came all the way. But, my question is, on the moment we're in a transitional period. I think Karl mentioned that. So not everybody has a multimedia add-on for its press release. So what happens most frequently? This is a question for all the journalists. Does adding a video to your press release make a difference in doing an item about it or not? Or making a big item instead of a small? Or maybe a better item in terms of more appealing or more public understanding?
Can we start with Karl?
Video, I think video helps pick up. We know the items we post that have video in them get more traffic. Video is a nice adjunct to the story you're trying to tell. Again, it shows the story. So I think both the media and the general public who see the release you've done and watch the video get their minds around it a little better. And in the case of television reporters or web sites, those short videos also serve as sort of audition tapes. They see what the person looks like and how well she presents herself and what she talks like, and that can serve you very well in trying to get your stories placed. It's one thing to have really cool science, but for that person to then be able to go on the Today Show, it's great to use your website to show a little audition tape that, look, this woman's really good. You want to call her up.
I'm just going to, I hope I don't offend Karl's humility, but I think part of the reason that he's even here today is because of his exquisite use of multimedia in an email. Karl, please explain.
Oh, yeah, it wasn't that big a deal. Ginger Pinholster of EurekAlert was exploring all of this stuff she now has in the back. What should we buy? What kind of equipment do we need? Da-da-da-da. And she was looking at very high-end, very expensive things, and I happened to have one of our flip cams on my desk. So when I was done talking to her on the phone, I picked it up and held it at arm's length and said, "Ginger, this really isn't that hard." And I plugged it in and I emailed it to her. She blew her away. That's why I'm here.
See, pretty good. All right, let's hear from Nils.
As I think I said before, I don't think the quality of what you have available isn't going to really affect my decision on whether you've got a story that I want to do or not. But it will affect a couple of other things. When I tell the web that we're doing a story, and I add to this that there's some really good visual stuff you could use with this that may very well give it better presence on our web page than it would otherwise have. And from time to time, something will come by that I think stands on its own, really cool video or whatever, and I will call up our producer over there and say, I don't think we're going to have a chance to do this story, but I looked at this. It's legit. It looks credible. And it stands on its own. You might want to think about using it on its own on the site. It doesn't happen a lot, but once in a while. So that's what I would say.
Like Karl said, I think yes, everything Nils just said true for me coming the other direction. And as Karl said, I think it does serve as an audition in terms of telling me whether or not you've got an interesting character who's, I mean, and I mean that in the best sense of the word, an interesting person who we can really talk with and, extend and make a really great story around.
Would you take audio off video? Would you take audio off video, Art?
Yeah, I could do that. And I had never really thought about it as a audition, but yeah, that's exactly right. It does. I was going to say though that also, I think that it's just a little more compelling than the print of a press release. It can get you engaged. It may be some interesting visuals or the passion of the person who's doing the talking, but it does, and it also stands out from the crowd. That helps too.
And I think ultimately it still is, if it's a good story, regardless of whether there's video attached to it or not, and if it's something that's really compelling or could be a great story. But then if you have the video added onto it, that makes it even a better sell, I guess.
Fantastic. Please thank our panelists for all their insight and information today. Just going by the RIA barometer, I think that's the most sustained applause we've had from PIOs at this particular annual meeting. So thank you very much for your encouragement, for your involvement. I would encourage you to visit Ginger back here at the studio, see how you can set up something for your website. Thank you all very much, and good news gathering. Thank you.